The top business stories live from the Sky News City studio. What will the consequences of the bridge collapse in Baltimore be for container shipping? Shares of Donald Trump's social media group surged by 45% on their debut on NASDAQ. And the San Francisco company, which claims its AI service is transforming the world of sales. Good afternoon, this is Business Live with me, Ian King. Well, welcome to Business Live. A major rescue operation is continuing after a 1.6-mile-long bridge collapse following the collision involving a cargo ship in the US city of Baltimore in Maryland. This was the moment around 1:30 local time that the Dali container ship chartered by Maersk, which was on its way to Colombo in Sri Lanka, collided with one of the pillars of the Francis Scott Key Bridge. It's going to block the waterway for some time. But what are the wider implications for shipping and the ocean freight industry? Well, we're expecting to hear from President Joe Biden shortly. But before all of that, most of us are used to tapping into knowledge instantly through assistants such as Siri or Alexa. Well, now a San Francisco-based company is claiming to offer something similar to salespeople. Gong, whose customers include Shopify, Cisco Systems and LinkedIn, says its AI-powered service called Ask Anything is helping sales teams close up to 26% more deals than they were previously. Well, joining me to talk about this is Amit Bendov. He's the founder and chief executive of Gong AI. Amit, welcome to you. How do you come by this figure?
Well, we actually ran a test and we analyzed 2 million deals, 1 million with AI-assisted salespeople and about 1 million without the AI. And we saw a 26% lift in win rates, which is very exciting. It's not a survey, it's not an opinion, it's actual data.
What data points does the AI use to forecast the likelihood of a deal going through?
It uses over 400 signals. So traditionally, business has been relying on sentiment of the sales team, like which deals we close based on what they're hearing, what they're guessing, which is fine. There's room for that. But the AI looks at anything from the velocity, how much activity, how many emails, what language the customers are using, what they're actually saying. If, for example, you've received an email that says, our CFO is now scrutinizing all budgets, that will lower the score of that deal, and it all adds up. So over 400 parameters, anything from what they say in emails, what they say in conversations, in meetings, how they behave, the amounts, everything.
Can the model also tell someone when a deal is not likely to go ahead and look, you might as well stop wasting your time on this?
Absolutely. One of the key success factors for salespeople that they know quickly how to qualify a deal in or out. With Gong, you could deploy any qualification methodology. Some have something simple. Do they have a budget? Do they have authority? Do they have a need? Do they have a timeline? Some have like more elaborate. Is their business outcome that they're trying to drive? Traditionally, companies relied on the salespeople to monitor that and check all the boxes. Now AI does it in a fraction of the time and does it to 100% of the deals. So if it's a waste of time, you might as well not invest the time.
Can you see a time when AI completely displaces human beings from deal making, or will they always need to be a human touch?
For some things, there are things that are very simple that, if you buy an iPhone, you don't need a salesperson, all the information is there, but there's still what is called considered purchases, things that are more complicated products like a mortgage or a house or software. And for that, you would need a salesperson, but it'll elevate the game because it removes a lot of the drudgery. You might not know that, but 77% of salespeople's time is spent on drudgery, updating forms, internal meetings, researching customer data. All of that will certainly go away.
I mean, while we have you, obviously this is a San Francisco-based business, but it was born in Tel Aviv from where you're speaking to us now. I just wonder how you're managing the business through the war with Hamas right now. Has it had an impact on what you're doing?
It doesn't have an impact on what we're doing. Like our business, we haven't missed a bit, even though we had some people drafted, which obviously can slow us down. But everybody works extra hard. It is emotionally very hard. There's still kind of war going in the south and the north, and it's kind of crazy. We have the hostages. There are lots of casualties on both ends, which is completely unnecessary. And the optimist in me hopes that human intelligence will outdo artificial intelligence, and we bring peace back. There's really no reason for all of this fighting that's going on.
Well, that's an optimistic note on which to end. Amit, it's good to talk to you this afternoon. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Some other business news stories for you now. And shares of Donald Trump's social media group jumped by 45% after making their debut on NASDAQ this afternoon. Trump Media and Technology, which owns the former US president's Truth Social platform, came to market via a merger with the blank check company Digital World Acquisition Corp that completed on Monday. That values the former president's 60% stake in the business at around $5.5 billion, although he is barred from selling any shares for 6 months. Truth Social lost $10.6 million in the first 9 months of last year. The gaming giant Flutter Entertainment said today it has achieved a first full year of profitability in the United States. The owner of Paddy Power, Sky Bet and Betfair said its FanDuel service, which is America's biggest sports betting business, had raised its share of the US sports betting market during the last year from 43.2% to 53.4%. Flutter, which is in the process of moving its primary stock market listing from London to New York, was reporting full-year sales of $11.8 billion for 2023. That was up 25% on 2022, but US sales were up 41%. Meanwhile, the company reported a net loss of $1.2 billion. That was up from $370 million in 2022, reflecting non-cash impairment charges, including a major one on its PokerStars business. And the FTSE 100 engineering combine Smiths Group said today that its chief executive, Paul Keel, has stepped down with immediate effect to take up a major job in his native US. Mr. Keel, who'd been at the helm for just under 3 years, is returning straight away to where his family lives. Well, his successor is Roland Carter, who's recently led Smiths Detection, the airport scanner maker. Smiths was reporting an operating profit of £246 million for the 6 months to the end of January, which was up 5% on the same period last year. The shares have risen 1.5%. And more evidence that inflation is moderating after grocery price inflation fell to a level not seen since the war in Ukraine. The marketing data and analytics firm Kantar said that during the 4 weeks to St Patrick's Day, supermarket sales were up 4.5% on the same period a year earlier. That represented the lowest rate of inflation since February 2022, the month that Russia began its war against Ukraine. Kantar said that during the period, grocery sales were up 4.6% on the same period last year. Just a reminder, we're expecting to hear from President Joe Biden very shortly on his reaction to what's happened in Baltimore over the last 24 hours. Shares of Good Energy have fallen by a fifth today after the renewable energy supplier warned that sales this year would be significantly lower on the back of reduced wholesale energy prices. The company, one of the UK's leading installers of heat pumps and solar panels, was reporting a pre-tax profit of £5.7 million for 2023. That was down 38% on 2022, but that largely reflected previous year's one-off gains. Well, joining me now is Nigel Pocklington. He's the chief executive of Good Energy. Nigel, welcome to you. Nice to see you again. You made 3 acquisitions during the year. I mean, that does make it a little bit difficult for us lesser mortals to work out what's going on an underlying basis.
Yes, and then you add the energy crisis into that as well, and it does get quite difficult. I think the best way through it I can offer is that we made a pre-tax profit of £5.7 million. That was somewhat ahead, actually, of market expectations on the prior year. Those acquisitions really aren't beginning to contribute to that profit number until next year and beyond. So that's a reasonably clean read on it. Obviously, the sales line is quite hard to understand because most of it is driven by the cost of the commodity we sell in the first place, and that's been very volatile.
In terms of your assumptions on wholesale energy prices this year, you clearly think they're going to be down than last year. Do you have an idea how much?
Yes, they seem to be stabilising, which is the first thing to say, and they're stabilising at this sort of price cap level we've got now of a cap around £1,600. Beyond that, we're not really making much more projection, except that it does feel the market is that much flatter, and that will make our future earnings statements maybe a bit more straightforward to understand.
In terms of the services part of the business, what are you seeing right now in terms of demand for installation of solar panels and heat pumps?
Well, the solar market is in period of very strong growth. So last year it grew by about 38% in the UK. It's about a £1.9 billion market already. And we think that is going to grow to about £4.6 billion by the end of the decade, really partly because energy prices are stubbornly stuck quite high. And actually the product itself is easier for people to use and operate these days. So there's a lot of consumer demand for that. Heat pumps have lagged a bit, although there was still 35,000 heat pump installations across the UK last year. That's a 23% increase as well. I'd expect the heat pump market to grow again in double digits from next year as beyond. And when you see things like the government subsidy for boiler replacement begin to really kick in, and hopefully some of the disinformation or misinformation around heat pumps, I should say, is dealt with as we go through the year.
One thing that quite interested me about the results, you've raised the dividend over the course of the year by 12.5%. You've only just raised £2.1 million via a new share issue. I wonder why you feel the need to give some of that back to investors almost straight away.
So the share issue was a pretty small raise. We raised £2.1 million, more to bring in some new investors into our register. Good Energy shares are always quite tightly held and our liquidity was quite small. The actual cost of that dividend is in the hundreds of thousands. It's a relatively small dividend yield. We are very much a growth stock, and that's our stated capital allocation policy, if you like. But some investors do want to see something of a dividend, so we have paid one and we continue to, and we've grown it, but it's off a relatively small level. We're really not a yield stock. We're investing for growth.
Now, the third leg of the business, of course, is ZapMap, which is your app for EV drivers. Does that sit easily in the business now that essentially you are a supply and services business for homeowners?
I think we have choices for ZapMap in the future. It sits quite well with us in the UK. Electric vehicle drivers are 7 times more likely than the average population to install solar panels, for example. So a source of customer acquisition, it's a source of products for us. We'll be bundling ZapMap subscriptions with our electric vehicle tariff in the next quarter. If they are successful in fundraising to expand internationally, that's obviously less of what we do. And we'd be happy, frankly, to see other investors come in alongside us and to dilute our position a bit. But it will always to be seen as to how the fundraise goes across the next quarter.
OK, just to warn you in advance, Nigel, we're expecting President Biden any moment, so apologies in advance if I have to cut you off. Are you worried that there might be a backlash against heat pumps of the kind that we've seen in Germany?
There's a lot of misunderstanding about them. We've done quite a lot of survey work on them. People think they're noisy. People think that they are result in cold homes. And over time, we need to chip away at this. I think the interesting thing about the last year is actually there's good evidence of underlying customer demand for heat pumps. About 40% of the jobs we do are people replacing bottled gas or heating oil, which are terrible products, frankly, which have exposed people to the spot market for these commodities for the last couple of years. And they're very happy customers with the conversion. So I've got quite a lot of hope that that will change over time, but it's been unhelpful for a while.
Obviously, a lot of people worry about the cost of heat pump installation. It seems to be a major factor in deterring people. Are you confident that the price will come down over time?
I mean, like any consumer good, it's only just beginning to build volume. So there'll be a reduction in the purchase cost of heat pumps we can expect over time. With the boiler replacement grant now at £7,500, it's beginning to get to some parity with replacing your boiler for some customers. And then when you factor in the cheaper operating costs, and at the height of the oil price, it was actually about £1,000 cheaper a year to run a heat pump versus an oil boiler, for example. Some of that concern can be allayed, but I'd expect it to get more competitive for some people as the market develops.
And with the solar panel business, I mean, obviously a lot of anxiety is out there about the fact that China is the world's leading manufacturer of solar panels by some distance. Over time, how do you see countries like the UK reducing its dependence on China for solar panels?
Yes, that's right. I mean, it's partly where the source material comes from. And we, along with a lot of other players in the market, are very actively exploring our sourcing and understanding who has the most ethical supply chain. I think it's going to be a long shift away from that, really, given both the source of polysilicon and the production capacity the Chinese have got. I mean, what we've done so far is make sure we're sourcing as clearly as we can and actually to build up more stock than we'd normally expect to hold, just to buffer ourselves from some supply chain shocks. You would hope that as the market booms, alternative sources, particularly in the US, open up, and we'll be looking for those as well. But for now, it's one of those areas where we're quite exposed to China in terms of the supply chain.
What ability does China have to restrict the export of solar panels if it wanted to sort of play havoc with the transition in countries like the UK?
I mean, there's little evidence of that so far, because I think the US has enough production capacity to at least kind of, make a dent in them if they were to do anything like that. So, the biggest upset we've seen so far in the supply chain has been through COVID and the restrictions in China lasting longer than that. Beyond that, there's a lot of signs that supply chain has stayed open. But these are interesting questions for the energy transition, both in terms of the supply of silicon, cobalt for batteries, as well as another area we need to look into for alternative supply. And it will take a bit of time for the market to adjust.
OK, Nigel, busy day for your results day. We do appreciate you spending the time to chat. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Well, back now to the situation in Baltimore. And joining me now for some analysis is Emily Strausbull, the market analyst at Zenita, which is a consumer shipping data and analytics business. Emily, good afternoon to you. Baltimore is not one of the largest US East Coast ports, but it still has scope to cause a lot of disruption to supply chains, doesn't it? Oh, Emily,
yes,
I must
absolutely.
cut you off. Sorry, Joe Biden's popped up. I do apologise. We're going to have to go to him.
An accident that happened in Baltimore this morning. At about 1:30, a container ship struck the Francis Scott Key Bridge, which I've been over many, many times commuting from the state of Delaware, either on a train or by car. I've been in Baltimore Harbor many times. And the bridge collapsed, sending several people and vehicles into the water, into the river. And multiple U.S. Coast Guard units, which are stationed very nearby, thank God, were immediately deployed along with local emergency personnel. And the Coast Guard is leading the response to the port, where representatives from the Federal Highway Administration, the FBI, the Department of Transportation, the Army Corps of Engineers, as well as Maryland officials and Baltimore Police and Fire, are all working together to coordinate an emergency response. Officials at the scene estimate 8 people were unaccounted for still. Not still, were unaccounted for. That number might change. 2 have been rescued, 1 without injury, 1 in critical condition. And the search and rescue operation is continuing for all those remaining as we speak. I spoke with Governor Moore this morning, as well as the Mayor of Baltimore, the county executive, both United States senators and the congressman. And my Secretary of Transportation is on the scene. I told them we're going to send all the federal resources they need as we respond to this emergency. And I mean all the federal resources. And we're going to rebuild that port together. Everything so far indicates that this was a terrible accident. At this time, we have no other indication, no other reason to believe there's any intentional act here. Personnel on board the ship were able to alert the Maryland Department of Transportation that they had lost control of their vessel, as you all know and reported. As a result, local authorities were able to close the bridge to traffic before the bridge was struck, which undoubtedly saved lives. Our prayers are with everyone involved in this terrible accident and all the families, especially those waiting for the news of their loved one right now. I know every minute in that circumstance feels like a lifetime. You just don't know. It's just terrible. We're incredibly grateful for the brave rescuers who immediately rushed to the scene, and to the people of Baltimore who want to say, we're with you. We're going to stay with you as long as it takes. And like the governor said, you're Maryland tough, you're Baltimore strong, and we're going to get through this together. And I promise we're not leaving. Here's what's happening now. The search and rescue operation is our top priority. Ship traffic in the Port of Baltimore has been suspended until further notice, and we'll need to clear that channel before the ship traffic can resume. The Army Corps of Engineers is on the spot and is going to help lead this effort to clear the channel. The Port of Baltimore is one of the nation's largest shipping hubs, and I've been there a number of times as a senator and as a vice president. It handles a record amount of cargo last year. It's also the top port in America for both imports and exports of automobiles and light trucks. Around 850,000 vehicles go through that port every single year, and we're going to get it up and running again as soon as possible. 15,000 jobs depend on that port, and we're going to do everything we can to protect those jobs and help those workers. The bridge is also critical for travel, not just for Baltimore, but for the Northeast Corridor. Over 30,000 vehicles cross the Francis Scott Key Bridge on a daily basis. It's virtually, it's one of the most important elements for the economy in the Northeast and the quality of life. My transportation secretary is there now. As I told Governor Moore, I've directed my team to move heaven and earth to reopen the port and rebuild the bridge as soon as humanly possible. And we're going to work hand in hand with the support of Maryland to support Maryland whatever they ask for. We're going to work with our partners in Congress to make sure the state gets the support it needs. It's my intention that the federal government will pay for the entire cost of reconstructing that bridge, and I expect the Congress to support my effort. This is going to take some time. The people of Baltimore can count on us, though, to stick with them at every step of the way until the port is reopened and the bridge is rebuilt. You know, we're not leaving until this job gets done. Not leaving until then. So I just want to say God bless everybody who everyone harmed this morning and their families. And may God bless the first responders, many of whom risking their lives. And the reason I'm not going to take a lot of questions, there's remaining issues that are open that we got to determine what's going to happen in terms of the rescue mission and the like. But
Do you plan to go to Baltimore, sir? And if so, how quickly?
I do, and as quickly as I can.
You said the federal government's also going to pay for the repairs. I'm just curious, this was a ship that appears to be at fault. Is there any reason to believe that the company behind the ship should be held responsible? And then also, you mentioned...
That could be, but we're not going to wait till that happens. We're going to pay for it to get the bridge rebuilt and opened.
What did you make of Israel's decision not to attend this meeting this week?
Oh, I don't want to get into that. I'll have plenty of time to talk about Rafah.
You mentioned the port. Can I ask about cars? About the port.
On the ground there from Baltimore. We can now go live to the scene and our US correspondent, Martha Kelner. Martha, most interesting question there at the end, really. Who's going to ultimately pay for all this?
Yeah, I think that's something that will be, a topic of conversation in the coming weeks and months. But the authorities here being very careful to stress that their primary objective today is focusing on the search and rescue operation and the recovery operation. It is clearly highly unlikely now that any survivors will be found in the water. It was about 9 degrees Celsius in the river when that bridge collapsed at around 1:30 a.m. this morning. The window of survivability was estimated by experts to be between 1 and 3 hours. We're now way past that point, so clearly it's an incredibly excruciating time for the families and friends of those who are still waiting for news on those 6 people unaccounted for as a result of this bridge collapse. I was just around a mile from here a short time ago at a petrol station, and I spoke to a gentleman who works for the construction company which the workers on the bridge also worked for. There were 8 people on that bridge working to repair potholes, 6 of them still unaccounted for, 1 of them critically ill in hospital, another not requiring hospital treatment. That gentleman was telling me that those workers are mainly from Central America and Mexico, and he was saying he can't put into words the pain that he's feeling today as he waits for news of his friends. He said that the company that he works for always prioritises the safety of staff, but clearly they stood no chance. I don't know whether you can quite make out, just beyond me, just over my right shoulder, I think, the Francis Scott Key Bridge in the distance. I'll tell you what happened. The ship, the Dali container ship, came straight into the 2 support pillars which support the central part of that bridge. It is almost entirely collapsed now. What we do know is that the crew on board that vessel did make a mayday call in the minutes before the ship hit the bridge. They said they'd lost power, propulsion, and they warned of a catastrophic event. And as a result of that, officials on both sides of the bridge, it's a toll bridge, so it's always manned on both sides, they were able to stem the flow of traffic, which you presume avoided an even greater tragedy than the one that we're seeing unfold here today.
Martha, the President there mentioned the extent to which this port is so important for the northeastern US economy. How easily do you think it's going to be for shipping to be diverted to other northeastern ports like New York from Baltimore?
I think that's going to be a priority because this port is so important. It's one of the 20 biggest ports in America, particularly important for supplying motor vehicles across the country. In fact, it's the biggest port for the supply and distribution of motor vehicles in America. So that's going to be a priority, getting it up and running. Interestingly, both President Biden there and earlier on, the governor of Maryland, Wesley Moore, saying that this will be a long-term rebuild project. The governor also saying that those who have been most deeply impacted by this tragedy will be remembered in the reconstruction of the bridge, whether that be through how it's designed or a memorial plaque. We don't yet know, but they say they will honour the memory of those affected by this tragedy.
OK, Martha, thanks very much for that. No doubt we'll be in touch with you later on throughout the evening here on Sky News. That's it from me. I'm back again at 11:30 tomorrow morning with Business Live. I'm sorry we didn't have time for the markets. I can tell you all of Wall Street is trading to the upside right now. Back next, it's Mark Austin with the News Hour. See you tomorrow. Cheerio.